the kidney. So I've gotten a lot of requests for this. And hopefully I can make this somewhat short and people can understand. So the kidney is an excretory organ, which means that it's one of its jobs is to excrete metabolic waste, so waste that is produced from chemical reactions in cells. And it is responsible for excreting urea, which is a nitrogenous waste. So it's produced from nitrogen, basically extra nitrogen that your cells don't need. Right, and so that's made into urea, and then that urea is taken to the kidney where it's filtered out. And I'll talk about the process of how that happens in a minute. There are, excuse me, 2 other excretory organs that you need to know about. So the others there include, the first one is the lungs. Okay, and the lungs excrete CO2, as you may obviously know, but they also are responsible for excreting water. Water is a byproduct of chemical reactions as well, right? Respiration ends up, the products of respiration are carbon dioxide and water. And then the other one is actually the skin. And the skin is also responsible for water as well as some salts. Okay, the kidney actually also excrete salts as well, but that's not its main function. All right, so this would be, think about sweat, right? That gets rid of water and salts. So the 3 excretory organs in your body are kidney, lungs, and skin. Now, the kidney is an excretory organ, but it also helps maintain homeostasis. So homeostasis is the idea of, so homeo means the same, right? And stasis is a state of being. So homeostasis is about maintaining a constant internal environment within a narrow range. Oh, did I not? Okay, I'll finish this, but I realized I forgot something else up here. Okay, maintaining a constant internal environment within a narrow range, right? And so there's several examples of this, but before I forget, I realize that I forgot it. Okay. It also, of course, excretes water. That's what urine is. It has water in it. Sorry. Okay. And so the examples of this, one would be osmoregulation, which is the regulation of water within the body. So the kidney obviously plays a large role of that, and that's what ADH does as well. So if you go back and watch the ADH video that I made last week, we talked about how it makes certain part of the kidney, the collecting duct, more or less permeable so that more or less water gets reabsorbed back into the blood. That's osmoregulation. So this is about water concentration within the blood or within the body. You also have glucose would be another example of homeostasis, blood glucose levels. And that, again, if you go back and watch my video on insulin, that's what insulin does, is it's one of the components that helps maintain blood glucose levels. So this should be blood, sorry. And then another example would be, of course, body temperature. For us and for many other mammals, obviously reptiles and other, but birds and mammals maintain their body temperature. So these are the 3 big examples of homeostasis. There are others, but those are the big 3, and they should be able to get you through anything. And so the idea is that the kidney is involved with osmoregulation, and I'm going to talk about how the nephron works next. Insulin is part of the blood glucose. It lowers the blood glucose levels, okay? And body temperature, there is a short section in your book about skin, right? How the skin helps maintain your body temperature, either releasing or keeping in as much heat as possible. If that doesn't make sense or that doesn't sound familiar, please drop me a line and I'm happy to make a video about that. So the kidney, how does the kidney work and what is actually going on? So I have a printout here because you didn't expect me to draw this, right? And so the idea is that you need to understand, so this is the nephron, which is the functional unit within the kidney. There are many thousands of these within each kidney, all right? And the kidney itself has 3 parts, which I guess I will draw now, if you'll bear with me before I get to the nephron. So you guys know that the kidney looks like literally a kidney bean, right? And there are 3 parts to it. The outermost one is called the cortex. The middle one is called the medulla, literally means the middle in Latin. Okay, and this is called the pelvis. And the idea is that when you're talking about a nephron, the nephrons are actually located mainly in the cortex, but then they dip down into the medulla, and I'll talk about which part does that. And then they all are connected to collecting ducts that end up in the pelvis. So the pelvis is basically the path to the ureter, which leads down to the bladder. All right. And again, if you don't know anything about the urinary system, you want me to do a video on that, I'm happy to do that, but I would need a printout. So the nephron. So the idea is that this is a branch. So this is the renal artery. Blood enters from the renal artery into the nephron. Okay. And the blood that enters carries a specific list of things that you should know. The first one is, of course, it has proteins. It has glucose. It has salts, sometimes are ions, you could call these, doesn't matter. Salts in a more general sense of ions. Proteins, glucose. It has obviously water, urea, and sometimes we say it also has blood cells, which it does, but we sometimes don't talk about that much. All right. And so the idea is that it enters into the nephron here, into this first part, and the inside, I don't know if you can see that very well, kind of, within this, the first part of the nephron, there, what's called B here on the inside, this is the glomerulus. And it is a ball of capillaries. Glomerulus. See that? Okay. And it's basically a little ball of capillaries. And the idea is that it's under very high pressure. All right. And surrounding the outside of the glomerulus, this C is the first part of the nephron, and it is called the Bowman's capsule. Yes, you can see that? Okay. So, so the blood is under very high pressure. And so the process that takes place inside the Bowman's capsule is called ultrafiltration. And ultrafiltration has a very specific definition that you should know. Ultrafiltration. And ultrafiltration is the sorting of molecules by size due to high pressure. So it's kind of like it's kind of like pointing a fire hose at something. It's under extremely high pressure. And so the idea is that the Bowman's capsule, the basement membrane of the Bowman's capsule, is like a filter. And so anything that's small enough to go through that filter, go through the basement membrane, will go through and end up in the Bowman's capsule. Now, what ends up going in? So you should know, so this is size only, right? So things that are small will go through. So the things that are small include urea, water, salts and ions, and glucose. Proteins and blood cells are too large. Sorry, you can't see there. Proteins and blood cells too large. They stay in the blood and then come right back out. All right. So the protein never enters it stays in the blood. So it never enters into the nephron technically. All right. And it does that because it's too big. And the blood cells as well. They're obviously too large as well. Now, all of these small molecules that get inserted, they get through the basement membrane of the Bowman's capsule, enter into the Bowman's capsule, and that is called the glomerular filtrate. Yes? Okay. And the glomerular filtrate then makes its way through the nephron, of which there are several parts you should know. Let's go back up here. I'm going to stick with the blue as long as people can see it so that it doesn't take up as much space. So D here, the first part here, the first part of the nephron, this is called the proximal convoluted tubule. Fancy name. It also can be called the first coiled tubule. And this is where, and so the idea is that these four all get sorted into the glomerular filtrate because they're small, but your body wants some of them and doesn't want other parts of it. So for example, the urea is a waste. So all of the urea ends up going through the entire nephron and into the collecting duct, which is over here. That's what this is. And the collecting duct leads directly to the ureter, which goes to the bladder. So it gets put in the urine. That's how you get rid of that. But glucose, salts, and water are all useful to your body in some quantities, and so your body doesn't want to get rid of them. Instead, it reabsorbs them. And so glucose is reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule, just in the first part of this, okay? And the reason that the glucose is reabsorbed is because, of course, your body wants glucose for respiration. It needs it in order to do aerobic respiration, any type of respiration. So the glucose is reabsorbed here, and that is done by active transport. Should have gotten a bigger paper, guys, but I'll do the best I can. So via active transport. So the glucose is reabsorbed via active transport in the proximal convoluted tubule. Right? This bottom part here, don't worry about all these letters. This whole thing is called the loop of Henle. And this is the part of the nephron that dips down into the medulla. Remember here, I said if this is my pretend nephron, it dips down into the medulla. That is the loop of Henle. Okay, and the loop of Henle is where you get a lot of water reabsorption, which happens, as you may guess, by osmosis, and you do get some salt reabsorption here as well, but this is mainly water reabsorption. Okay. And so the idea is that this happens by osmosis. So if you have a very low water concentration outside of the loop of Henle, then of course you're going to get more water absorbed out of the loop of Henle and reabsorbed back into the body. So something to keep in mind. Sometimes they like to ask about this section. This part here is called the distal convoluted tubule. This is proximal, right? The first one, and then distal, far away. So distal. I apologize that this is not focusing better. And you get water reabsorbed here as well as salts. They hardly ever ask about the distal convoluted tubule. You need to know that it's there and maybe we'll be able to name it, but I've never seen them ask about it, right? And then from the distal convoluted tubule, you go into the collecting duct, which I already talked a little bit about here. Now, the collecting duct, again, you get water and salt reabsorption. And the thing you want to remember about this is that this is the part of the nephron that ADH acts on. So remember when your body, so this is from the ADH video that I made, ADH acts on the collecting duct and increases the permeability. If you increase the permeability, then more water is going to come out of the collecting duct and go back into the blood. So that's your nephron. I wish that was better. And so the process in the Bowman's capsule is ultrafiltration. Now, I talked about, so you get water reabsorbed here, glucose reabsorbed there, water absorbed here, and water there as well. And the thing to remember is that each of these molecules that get reabsorbed, other than urea because it doesn't get reabsorbed, are reabsorbed to different levels. And that is a process that is called selective reabsorption. And so when we talk about the kidney and the processes that occur within the nephron, ultrafiltration is one of the ones you need to know, and the other one is selective reabsorption. And selective reabsorption is exactly what it sounds like, which is that different molecules are reabsorbed to different degrees, or to different levels, you could say. And what I mean by that is, so for example, out of all the water that runs through your kidneys, about 99.8% of the water from the kidneys or from the glomerular filtrate is reabsorbed, right? The vast majority of water in your body wants to stay in your body. And so it gets reabsorbed. About I think something like 80 to 85% of the salts get reabsorbed. Okay. And 100% of the glucose, unless you're diabetic, because then your glucose levels can be so high that it doesn't get reabsorbed. So having glucose in your urine suggests that you may have diabetes. If you have something like glucose and proteins in your urine, that suggests that you could be having like kidney failure, because the nephrons, the fact that proteins are being allowed through into the glomerular filtrate suggests there's really something wrong with your kidneys at that point. So that's not good at all. Anyway, so 100% of the glucose, the vast majority of the water, and then maybe 80 to 85% of the salts are reabsorbed. And so the idea is that, so these different molecules are reabsorbed at different levels. That process is called selective reabsorption. And so ultrafiltration and selective reabsorption are the two main like processes that occur within the nephron, and you need to be aware of where they occur. Okay, so selective reabsorption would be all these parts of the nephron other than the Bowman's capsule. Ultrafiltration happens in the Bowman's capsule, and you need to be aware of which molecules get reabsorbed and by how much.